Hello. This afternoon, I will be your host as we briefly discuss the topic of communication in this Transformation of Relationship series. My name is Alex TD, and this is a look on the surface. My personal approach to communication is a little more cautious, I might call it. This comes from many years and many interactions being misunderstood in one way or another. So it is through this ongoing experience that I have found it requires a certain adjustment to understand what is required to communicate with someone other than oneself. When we communicate with others, I find that this is something that has been long taken for granted, and the appreciation for communication with others has become eroded to some extent. What seems to no longer be appreciated is just how much effort is genuinely required to communicate, specifically verbal communication. Verbal communication has to go through, biologically speaking, a very long process. The thoughts and the sentence structure, the meaning, all of these things need to occur. And depending on the healthiness of our physiology, this process may or may not be inhibited. I personally prefer a large degree of silence. A brief story: I once attended a 10-day Vipassana meditation course. During the length of that course, they practiced what is called noble silence. And as an introvert, I have to tell you, it was like heaven on earth, not having to say a single word to anyone the entire time. It was beautiful. I can definitely say I enjoyed that particular experience. However, many of the other attendees were itching, craving to be able to communicate with one another on the last day or two of the course. And I can understand why. We spent all that time in silence with ourselves, and in a way, only communicating with ourselves. Only communicating, no speaking, only listening to ourselves from the inside. Whether it was physical sensations, thoughts, spiritual or somatic hallucinations. There's so many different elements occurring simultaneously that it took 10 days of sitting in silence just to be able to develop a basic skill to hear oneself internally. Many of us have lost trust in communicating with ourselves. and we therefore look outside of ourselves to receive incoming communication to provide us with the information that we so desperately need. When really, it just requires a little bit of internalization. So how then can we take this practice of communicating with oneself and better externalize this? Many times, the way that we communicate is very quick, snappy, speedy. We want to get the message across as quickly and succinctly as possible. So for someone like myself who is regularly misunderstood and is not often given the time required to adequately express myself, I get this. It takes me a little bit extra time to develop a short answer to something. And if someone cares to hear the longer answer, then they typically make that known to me. As we progress in externalizing this practice of communication with others in whatever kind of relationships we might have, being intentional seems to do wonders. Oftentimes, before we speak, we are not clear within ourselves the intent or the goal or the outcome that we are hoping for when we externalize our communication. Many people are privy to this. With the age of technology and email and text messaging and DMing and whatnot, we found that in using written language, it provides a buffer of time to respond. It provides space to be within oneself to craft a reply. So innately, we understand this. However, oftentimes the same mistake gets made with written communication as it does with verbal communication. Another element to consider is the various styles of communication. Just as you may have learned that there are different styles of learning, different styles of leadership, and such, there are also different variations of communicating. Now, unfortunately, there is no direct way of being able to succinctly summarize the variations of communication styles. There are some quizzes and assessments that you can find online which may provide some level of depth that you may find useful, whether it be for yourself or others. But in general, simply understanding another, creating the time and the space to listen not just hear, but listen. And not doing so simply to insert your own thoughts, beliefs, or ideas, but listening for the sake of understanding another. When you seek to understand another, it begins to become much clearer as to the way that that other individual hears things, the way that they understand things, the way that they receive information and communication. It may be glaringly obvious to all of you that you could be speaking with someone and then you come home and speak to one, two, or more others in your own household. And there's a very distinct difference in how it may look, sound, and feel to communicate with, say, a mother-in-law versus someone that you live with at home. Another piece that I'll add to the end of this discussion is the sand trap that is familiarization. We begin to take for granted as we learn about someone else. We begin to take for granted that this is the way they are. This is who they are. This is what they do or what they are like. This familiarization turns into a trap because it stagnates communication. Now, let's not confuse this with having an effective strategy and a robust understanding of someone else to where the two of you are able to dynamically communicate with one another going forward. And sometimes it needs adjustments. And sometimes it needs to be scrapped and started from scratch. Sometimes you think you got it, and then you don't. Other times, you may feel completely lost, as if there's a gap in the communication. Hey, I thought we had this figured out. What's with this gap that we have here? What happened here? So that would be a healthy dynamic of understanding with a robust strategy for communicating going forward. But the pitfall of communication, that is becoming familiar with someone else and, in a sense, fitting them into this box. You begin to lose whatever is on the inside of that other individual. When you become familiar and put that individual in a box, it eliminates any further capacity to create that understanding. This is a pity and a shame. And unfortunately, due to the circumstances of recent events, this element, this lack of communication, or this familiarization with one another, has started to become glaringly obvious to those around us that we live with, that we work with, that we communicate with long distance. So, my suggestion going forward for all of us is to begin breaking out of that box. Begin to once again seek to understand one another. I'm not saying this as a guarantee that you will be able to figure things out, or that this will be the magic bullet that completes whatever was missing in the picture before. I'm not saying that. However, at the very least, my hope is that you will find much more clearly what it takes to improve your relationships with others, to learn what it takes to continually choose to create understanding with one another, and thereby effectively improving your communication with one another. And if that means that that communication between you and another can be bridged together, so be it. All the better. On the other hand, if it means that you learn that there continues to be misunderstanding, or that even with the effective communication, things are not able to move forward, and in that communication you learn that things must be let go of in some way, shape, or form, that something needs to change somehow, some way, then so be it. I hope that going forward, that we can all become much more understanding of one another, recognizing that this is an externalization of how well we understand ourselves internally. But it can be helpful to have others as a mirror to reflect that which we do or do not like within our own self. That'll be all for now. I thank you for your time. My name is Alex TD, and this has been a look on the surface.